People pay good money to see this movie. When they go out to a theater, they want cold sodas, hot popcorn, and no monsters in the projection booth.
Everyone pretend podcasting isn't boring.
Turn it off. Turn it off.
Once upon a time, the American dream was power, wealth, and success. But in the city that never sleeps, the American dream is about to get a wake-up call.
Just got hired today. You know, entry level. But I got big ideas.
When the president and owner of 87% of the company's stock drops, then the company too has a problem. What we need now is a new president. Some jerk.
My leg is on fire.
We can really push around.
Yo! Yeah, you, Barnes! This letter was sent down this morning by the big man himself.
Sit down, son. Go ahead. Try it on.
Did the Fortune City own idea, man, when they promoted you from the mailroom?
Well, I guess so. I don't think they promoted me because they thought I was a schmo.
The guy's a real moron.
Cigarettes?
No, thank you.
What an imbecile. Come up with this.
From Joel and Ethan Coen.
It's fun, it's healthy, the kids will just love it, and we put a little sand inside to make the experience more pleasant.
Did you have any idea there'd be such a huge response?
This is the president.
I don't think anybody expected this much hoopla.
Comes a comedy of fame, fortune, sex, greed, and the American way.
Say, Amy, how about you and I grab a little dinner or a show after work? I was thinking maybe the King and I. How about Oklahoma?
Tim Robbins, Jennifer Jason Leigh, and Paul Newman.
I'm getting off this merry-go-round.
Plexiglass.
How do you think this?
The Hudsucker Proxy.
Welcome to the projection booth. I'm your host, Mike White. Joining me once again is Ms. Rahne Alexander.
Pleasure to be here.
Also back in the booth is Mr. David Kittrredge.
I love this podcast, and I love you, Mike.
Our month appreciating comedic films continues with the Coen Brothers' Hudsucker Proxy. Released in 1994, the film stars Tim Robbins as Norville Barnes, a graduate of Muncie, Indiana's business school. He gets a job at Hudsucker Industries, whose CEO, wearing Hudsucker, happens to join the great hereafter the day Norville begins work. After a mix-up, Barnes goes all the way from the mailroom to the boardroom and becomes the new interim head of the corporation. We will be explaining the ins, the outs, and the what-have-yous about this story and ruining it as we go along. We'll also be talking a lot about the poster art for the movie and how it is a spoiler unto itself, so if you haven't seen the movie, try to track it down, but don't look at the cover photo. Rahne, when was the first time you saw the Hudsucker Proxy, and what did you think?
1994, and I loved it from the moment I saw it. It was such a thrill ride, and I remember just sitting in my chair, being blown away by it, and somebody in front of me got up and started grousing about how it was the worst thing he's ever seen. And it was just one of those moments where I'm like, maybe I'll follow you out and fight you in the parking lot. I didn't do that, but that impulse where I'm just like, I'm having such an overwhelming moment of bliss. And here's...
David, how about yourself?
I first saw the Hudsucker Proxy definitely on video, probably in or around after I graduated college, because I graduated college in 1994, but I did not see it in its very short release. It was only released for a very short amount of time, and you could tell that the studio was very, despite it premiering at, I think, Sundance and going to a Cannes and stuff, the studio didn't seem to have a lot of faith in it. And I think their lack of faith showed in the marketing buy, and it was like a couple of weeks in theaters. And I believe it got mixed reviews. I saw it on video. I was tickled by it, but I did think it was a bit arch when I first saw it. And it took several times seeing it, and certainly this last time when I just saw it last week for the first time in, I don't know, like maybe 10 or 15 years, I am really blown away by this. I think that it's a mini masterpiece. But one thing that I think we should talk about is this is one of those rare movies that's a litmus test. And it's a litmus test for something very particular about cinephiles. It's a litmus test for what one looks for in a movie, or really how one views watching movies and what one wants from a movie when you sit down and watch it. And I think that's like a longer and more interesting discussion. And this is one of those very few movies that if you like it or don't like it, I feel like it reflects on not the movie as much as what you want out of a movie and what you want out of cinema.
I agree with that fully. This is everything I want in a movie, from top to bottom. Everybody's funny. Everybody's falling out of buildings. There's papers blowing all over. There's like this romance of a fake New York and what newspapers could be and should be. There's this supernatural veneer. Barely anybody gets in a car. It makes me very happy. It is literally my favorite movie.
Oh, wow. I can't say it's my favorite movie, but it's really great. And I see in our notes, because Mike is amazing and he makes notes and we are so well prepared for this. But before we even talk about Hudsucker Proxy, I would ask, could we possibly talk about the Coen Brothers coming up to Hudsucker Proxy? Because these are legendary, important American filmmakers. And very much, they define their filmmaking eras in a couple of different ways. And I feel like the Hudsucker Proxy is, I'm not really a plug, but this does fit. I'm doing a documentary on Exorcist II: The Heretic. I have been for a couple of years. And that was a movie in John Boorman's body of work that basically was such a catastrophe that it redefined the way he made movies. This was the Coen Brothers' first really big budget movie. This was a huge budget studio production, and they had never had that before. And it bombed incredibly. And we're not talking about the quality of the film. We're talking about the box office. It was an incredible bomb. It was a huge bomb. And working with studios also definitely was something that they weren't used to. Working with, there's the mercurial, and I would say, I think pretty well documented, somewhat problematic at times, producer Joel Silver, who's best known for Lethal Weapon and I think Die Hard and the Matrix movies. And so he was like one of these big, defined by the 80s, defined by Hollywood excess, the Don Simpson school of Hollywood producing. So they really went into the cauldron with this movie. And I think we can say it's also a testament to their artistic vision that it came out so like them. I don't know if they had Final Cut, but it certainly looks like they did. Starting out, they were these very low-level independent filmmakers in Texas, right? They make a movie called Blood Simple, which if you haven't seen it, please see it because it's so good. It's one of the best kind of American debut movies probably ever. Frances McDormand, 1984, Dan Hedaya. It's a noir, it's a mystery, and another amazing score by Carter Burwell, who they work with on Hudsucker. And after that, they did Raising Arizona, which was certainly much more expensive, but still reasonably small budget, and that is a comedy classic. It's also bears a lot in comparison to Hudsucker. It's very anarchic, it's very kind of crazy. And then Miller's Crossing, which is great, and then Barton Fink, which won the Palme d'Or. They were on top of the world, and then it was like, okay, you're getting your first big budget studio movie. So the stakes really couldn't have been higher for them at this moment. And so they were breaking out with this incredibly referential film. It refers to dozen movies in the 30s, 40s, Preston Sturges, and a lot of his Girl Friday, the Howard Hawks classic from 1940, I think. It's literally one of the best movies ever made, and it's possibly the best comedy ever made. And if it's not, it's in the top 5. It's an absurdly great movie. And Jennifer Jason Leigh patterns her performance in Hudsucker after Rosalind Russell in that. But yeah, I feel like a Hudsucker Proxy rewrote the Coens' career for them. Because if this movie had been a hit, if this movie had been a big success, and even a critical success, because it got mixed reviews, shockingly. I don't know if Fargo would have gotten made, or certainly not would have gotten made the way it was. And Fargo was the next step in their path toward this American mid-budget auteur path where they made such amazing films. Not all great, but a lot of great ones. Really an astounding run of movies.
For me, too, the influence of Sam Raimi and the inclusion of Sam Raimi, obviously, Michigan boy here. I love Sam Raimi, and the work that he did with the Coen Brothers, I always felt was very elevated, even when it comes to something like Crime Wave. In Crime Wave, you've got the Hudsucker State Penitentiary, you've got Hudsucker Industries in Raising Arizona. So this had been cooking for a while before it finally came up here and was the Hudsucker Proxy. And I had no idea. So I saw this at I think they call them a distributor's screening, like one of these weird screenings. It wasn't for press. I think it was for the distributors to see if they wanted to carry the movie in their theaters.
Oh, you mean the exhibitor meet thing? Because it was always Warner Brothers, but it had a distributor, but they were screening for the theater owners and the bookers, right? Yeah.
Exactly. So I went into this with a friend of mine who was a projectionist at the movie theater where I worked at when I was a kid. And so this is 94, and this is well after I'd worked at this theater, but a friend of mine knew how much I loved the Coen Brothers and said, hey, why don't you come along? There's this new Coen Brothers movie. So I went in completely cold. I had no idea throughout this entire movie. Please just try to picture this if you can. Watching this entire movie, and every single time Norville Barnes reaches into his shoe and brings out that picture of his big plan, that circle, for kids. And he just keeps showing this, and he's got the nice drawing of it on his desk, and he's refining his ideas and just keeps showing them to other people. And they just think he's an absolute lunatic. So when the moment comes that they reveal that his big idea is a hula hoop, I had no idea that it was coming. As opposed to the people now who see him holding a hula hoop on the VHS or the DVD or the Blu-ray cover, I'm just like, for fuck's sakes, you're ruining this movie. That was such a great reveal when they showed that it was a hula hoop. I was just elated. I couldn't get over it. And that was one reason why I just fell in love with this movie, because of that surprise. And I fell in love with it then, that day back in 1994, and I still love this movie. And I'm just continuing to find more references that they're doing. Finally sitting down and watching Mr. Deeds Goes to Town. And I'm like, oh, okay, Longfellow Deeds, Norville Barnes, these two hicks coming to town, getting picked up by this reporter who then starts to write all these unflattering things about him. Oh, okay. Or I'm watching a whole bunch of Preston Sturges movies. So Christmas in July, and this whole idea of this guy who has an idea, and that's enough to make it so that he gets promoted and put on this board and all of these great things. Then when they find out that his idea just isn't what they wanted it to be, or that it was another guy who was a contest winner. That's what it was, this whole contest thing that they have. And I love that his idea is terrible as well. This whole thing, he's fighting the system. Everybody says that coffee keeps you up at night. He knows that coffee does not keep you up at night, because if you can't fall asleep, it's not the brew, it's the bunk. And when Jennifer Jason Leigh says it's the bunk, I'm just like, oh, that's where it's coming from. I know it's a common phrase, but just, I know for sure that they're lifting that right out of Preston Sturges.
They're nothing if not students of cinema. And you see this all through their work. Going back to what we were talking about, like a litmus test for this movie, even before we get into the plot, I feel like there are almost two kinds of movie viewers, and more I'm beginning to, people look at movies as merely an escape, purely an escape, as in it's a passive experience. In other words, you sit there, you watch a movie, lose yourself in the movie, and you get up and it's like, okay, so that was a movie that was 2 hours and I was, brought on this journey and whatever. I feel that Hudsucker and a number of other movies that I really value are more active in the way that you would watch it. You have to be involved in it. You're actively involved in how it unfolds. And this movie being so referential, even if you don't know the references, and the music, the score is very referential to, I think, Mike, you sent this link because I couldn't place it. I was like, I know I've heard that classical theme, but I don't know where it was. Kittrredge, right? And that's the main theme of Hudsucker Proxy. And of course, film composers all throughout time immemorial refer to other works in their scores. But this movie, it's basically about as much about movies as it is about the plot. It is as much about cinema and going to the movies and the experience of seeing a film and being involved in it as it is about anything that Norville Barnes does one way or the other.
Absolutely. And storytelling and who's in control of the story. And just like that battle to be in control of who. who's in control of that story, I think, are at the heart of this. Yeah, I agree. I feel this is a film that I really enjoy watching actively as an artist. I'm a collage artist, and I think it would be one thing to watch this movie and think that it's really a pastiche of this and that and the other thing, and you could dismiss it, but I feel that would be a disservice, just a disservice to you as a viewer to say that, because it's conscious and it's deliberate and it's pulling from so many things. I hadn't even realized there's a phrase that the editor uses, which maybe I'll look it up. But it's pulled from McCabe and Mrs. Miller.
Look, Chief, if we had more access.
Yeah, and if a frog had wings, it wouldn't bump his ass a hopping.
Okay, which also they say in Raising Arizona.
I had no idea they were cribbing from Altman. You see, this is one of the reasons why the Coens are so amazing, especially if you're a filmmaker, especially if you really love cinema, because I think that cinema's like any other art form. You can just go into, if you like paintings, you can go into a museum and just experience the paintings, just look at the paintings. Okay. But if you study art, if you have art history background or whatever, going into a museum like that is a very different experience because, oh, this artist did this, and this was in this period of their career, and they're doing this with the color and this with the thing, and they're influenced by these other artists, and it's a much more rich kind of thing if you know that. But you don't. With the Hudsucker Proxy, I don't feel like you need to know that, but I do think that you need to view movies as more than just passive experiences. That's very much me. I can like an escapist movie like anyone. I can go watch a Marvel movie and enjoy myself for 2.5 hours and perfectly fine, whatever. But the movies that really grab my heart are the movies that invite you to engage with it, to tease you and bring you on this journey. So you're in the movie, but you're not lost in the movie. You're active in the movie. I wouldn't even say you're half in, half out. You're just you're yourself, but you're thinking while the movie is happening. You're not just in a hypnosis. And again, nothing against pure escapist cinema. I love a lot of pure escapist cinema, but I sometimes wonder, especially as the culture kind of progresses, and this is more in the last 10, 20 years, I worry about the people who think that's all movies are. And I think that the Coens, Joel Coen and Ethan Coen are two filmmakers that really challenge that notion. And I think the best filmmakers challenge that notion. Especially if you like anything that the Coen Brothers have ever done, this is the movie that you need to see that kind of redefine their entire trajectory.
Yeah, I was really shocked. And I think part of the reason why I decided to do this episode was we had Joseph McBride on last year, and he was talking about the Coen Brothers at one point when we were talking about Raising Arizona. And of all the movies in his book about the Coen Brothers, he doesn't like Hudsucker Proxy. And I'm like, how can you not like this? Writing about the Coen Brothers and seeing how, like you're saying, all of their things that they had been playing with kind of lead up to this moment. And it was almost good that it was a disaster for them, because I do think that Fargo put them in a new direction, and it's a phenomenal movie, but this one had to be made, and it's made with so much money and with so much care, so much, just who's the DP, Roger Deakins on this. And
Roger Deakins shot it. Shout out. Let's talk about the production design for just a moment. Even before Dennis Gassner was the production designer, and he does work here that is just astonishing. And it refers to all sorts of other, cinema. It refers to German expressionism. It refers to that. It's. I think my fiance Craig, who has an art history background, was just it's an Art Deco fever dream. And it is, and if you like Art Deco, oh my God, will you love this movie? Because everything in this movie is Art Deco and crazy and lovely, and the proportions are insane and arch and wonderful.
Just that H that comes up, the Hudsucker H that comes up during the opening credits, that very particular font face that they're using throughout this whole thing. The clock is just amazing, especially the clock in Sidney Musburger's office, where you see
with the shadows.
Yeah, the shadows, and that the clock is going in the right direction, but where he's sitting behind the clock, it looks like it's going counterclockwise, which plays into the whole theme of time. This whole movie takes place over a month, and we start with a moment in the current. We're just about to go from 58 to 1959, and then we do a flashback, so then you've got that circle going on as well. I mean, circles run rampant through this thing, talking about the production design, just how you see so many circles through this whole thing. The movie, it's very desaturated. You get to see just so many people wear browns and grays, and That, again, Sidney Musburger's office just looks like it could be in black and white if you just turn the color down just a smidge, because it is so desaturated with all of the whites and the grays throughout this whole thing.
I wonder how this movie would look in black and white, like just bringing it into an edit and like desaturating the whole movie. I bet it would be just gorgeous.
It's already gorgeous as a color movie. I can only imagine it looked just as gorgeous as a black and white. It looks fantastic. And like I said, there's so many of these recurring motifs through this whole thing. I don't know why I didn't realize that this movie takes place over a month, and it just, it comes along. Like all of these things are happening, and you get this whole rise and fall and rise again type of imagery that happens. That we start off with wearing Hudsucker, the Charles Durning character, taking a nosedive out of his own office. And I don't think we ever really get the reason for that other than lost love. It feels like when he wrote that blue letter to Sidney, Sidney was the one that ended up with the love of wearing Hudsucker's life, and he couldn't take it anymore after all this. Everything is so empty. And then we get his amazing fall down the front of the building. And talk about Art Deco, like you were saying, David. These buildings are just amazing. The model work in this is freaking fantastic, that all of New York City is built as this gigantic model, and all of the details that go in on that, just the way that the camera is moving across the bay and coming through these buildings and finally coming up to the Hudsucker building itself with that giant clock on it. And just that time seems to be controlled by Hudsucker. That when Moses sticks his broom inside of the clock, that it stops time for everyone except for an angel, Norville Barnes, Moses himself, and then Aloysius, who I believe is Satan's emissary.
It would seem to be the case.
And it's interesting because it does harken back to this kind of 40s post-war idea of capitalism being the thing that runs the world. I think Moses even has a line about how money runs the world, or money keeps the world turning, or something like that. And so it's very much, this movie is about American movies in a lot of ways, but it's certainly about post-war America. And it's about just how, and you see it like when he arrives in New York City and looks at that flipboard. Before the recording, we were all talking about how much we love the flipboards, I had to look up what it's called, and it's a Solari board, which used to happen in Penn Station, was like those things. And there's a wonderful one that they constructed for this movie at the very beginning when he's looking at jobs, and they're all printed up on the sign.
The Nidus Employment Agency. I had to look up what Nidus meant. It's a place or situation in which something is developed or fostered. So
there you go.
Perfect for jobs.
But also, again, it's the attention to detail and the attention to production design. The fonts on the board are perfect. Everything in this movie is so meticulously detailed and perfect. It's one of those movies that is just like you realize that these are auteurs. They were given an enormous budget to realize their vision, and they freaking realized it. Like, this is okay, we're going to do this. We have all this money from Warner Brothers. We're going to do this movie. And unfortunately, it didn't catch on with the public, but it's a movie that I feel it's a litmus test, really. Because looking back on it, I don't understand how any critic could have panned this movie, and yet it got a lot of pans. There were a number of critics who just didn't like this film. And Rahne, you were talking about these people who are storming out of the theater and stuff, and it's just, that's almost incomprehensible to me that you would be in this movie and not find something to like just watch. Like, even if you didn't like the movie, you just look at the pictures. It is just a gorgeous looking movie.
Yeah, it's puzzling that anybody would not like this film, even just a little bit.
Right.
If you like movies, if you like cinema, there's really something for everyone in this.
But I feel like there are a lot of people who really do resent having to be involved in a work of art, having to actually engage. And certainly, if you're exhausted and you want to flip on a movie at 2 a.m., it's for you or me. It could be this, because it is very arch. It doesn't embrace you as a viewer. It does keep you at somewhat of a distance because of the way that it is presented and the dialogue and the extreme stuff that happens, even in the performances or Jennifer Jason Leigh's everything she says in this film. And again, if we were going to talk about performances, I think Jennifer Jason Leigh steals every frame she's in. She gives a performance that is so good that you just wonder, oh God, could she have just like starred in like everything for 10 years after this? Because she is just that good. She is one of these actors that you drop her into anything and you just know it's going to improve the entire film.
I can see where her character would be very problematic for some people that just didn't like that mid-Atlantic accent that she's doing. I think it's fantastic. And I love just that you're talking about His Girl Friday, that clipping along of the dialogue, especially
it's totally Rosalind Russell. It's absolutely Rosalind Russell. The whole movie, she's basically doing an impression of Hildy Johnson, except it's not just an impression. She has this character. She is this character.
Oh, she's amazing, especially when she's in the newsroom and trading quips with Smitty. When she's there typing, she's got a cigarette in her mouth, got the phone under her ear. She's talking to the chief. She's talking to Smitty. She's writing her piece, and she's yelling out to the guy who creates the crosswords. Good.
Playlist bird.
And she's even
emu.
She's even doing words that the guy isn't setting. She's yelling out things to yell at her boss, to yell at Smitty, to
like a moron,
about,
a 5-letter word for whatever.
Right. Exactly.
What?
Oh, it's so good.
And is this guy from Chumpsville? Ha, I even pulled the old mother routine.
Adenoids.
Lumbago.
That gag's got whiskers on it.
I'm telling you, Smitty, the board of Hudsucker's up to something.
Hey, what's a 6-letter word for an affliction of the hypothalamus?
And it's a cinch, goiter. It's a cinch. This guy isn't in on it.
Oh, she's right here.
How much time to make the late final?
Chief.
Hiya, Chief. Just the person I wanted to apologize to.
About 7 minutes.
Yeah, I was all wet about your idea, man. Well, thanks for being so generous. It is human, and you are divine. No, he's no faker. He's 100% real McCoy. Beware of imitations, genuine article. The guy's a real moron. As in a 5-letter word for imbecile. Oh, as pure a specimen as I've ever run across. Okay, fortunately, if the August doesn't make me an expert, then my name isn't Amy Archer, and I never won the Pulitzer Prize. In 1957. My series on the reunited triplets. Well, come on down here, hammerhead, and I'll show it to you.
Amy, what's a 3-letter word for a flightless bird?
Not now, Morris. I'm busy. That's right. I said hammerhead is in a 10-letter word for a smug, bullying, self-important newspaperman. New, who couldn't find, that's GNU, couldn't find the Empire State Building with a compass, a roadmap, and a native guide. Or is it emu? And that's just potatoes, Smitty. Here comes the gravy. The chump really likes me. A Muncie girl.
Better off falling for a rattlesnake.
I'm telling you, this guy's just a patsy, and I'm going to find out what for. There's a real story here, Smitty. Some kind of plot, a setup, a cabal. Oh, and say, did I tell you?
He didn't offer you money.
A sawbuck.
And smackers. Let's grab a highball.
On Norville Barnes.
Yeah.
There's her. There's also Jim True, who is basically playing a cartoon character as Buzz. Going back to our Raising Arizona discussion, we talked about how Hi is basically like Woody Woodpecker. In this one, Jim True is just this crazy cartoon character that he's always got the quips.
Hiya, buddy. My name's Buzz. I got the fuzz. I make the elevator do what she does.
When he takes Norville all the way up to the boardroom or to the top level, and he says, "Good luck, buddy," and then opens up the doors again, "You're gonna need it." And it's such a Warner Brothers cartoon type moment.
It's like that scene in Roger Rabbit with Droopy, elevator operator, drops Bob Hoskins off at some crazy floor.
The Roger Rabbit link is something that I was thinking a lot about rewatching this time, because I feel like their version of New York is a really interesting parallel to Roger Rabbit's version of LA. I find them treading in the same universe in so many ways, right? Places that exist, but also don't quite exist in that same way, right?
Well, they're the cinema versions of them. This is a take on the 40s, 50s cinema version of New York. The same way Roger Rabbit was a take on the 40s, 50s LA. This is the idealized LA. Even the dirt is placed. It's very strategic. Like everything in the frame is so meticulously designed and so meticulously laid out on both of those films. Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Jim True, because he's best known for being on The Wire, which if you watch The Wire, he is not recognizable in this film at all. You know it's the same actor. But yeah, he's done everything, this guy. He's like a working actor. I believe he's still working today. He's done tons and tons of stuff, but I think he's best known because he was on The Wire for the whole time or something. there's a whole population of actors out here in LA and elsewhere. They're just in stuff, and you see them like, oh, that guy. And they make great, decent living, good living. They're working actors, and they bring it. And this guy brought it. Like, you can tell, like, even the scene where he's pitching to Norville Barnes at the end, or toward the end, fantastic, hilarious. It's so good. And I'm glad you brought up Sam Raimi in the writing, because Sam Raimi has been a very early collaborator with the Coen Brothers. You brought up Crime Wave, which is a movie that not enough people know about or have seen. Sam Raimi directed it, correct? But the Coen Brothers wrote it.
Yep.
And it, again, that was a lower budget movie, barely got released. Very few people know this movie outside of like video, where it got a cult following because it's crazy movie. Anyway, but look, we should probably talk about the plot at some point.
I've been working on it. I've been throwing stuff in.
It's my fault. I'm so sorry. I have so much to say about this movie.
I know. Me too.
But this is one of those movies where every single thing matters. Every single scene adds to the next scene, to the next scene, to the next scene. It's not like you could just throw away any one of these pieces. The way that we're introduced to characters, we're introduced to Norville by his feet, this whole montage of him coming into town on the Wolverine bus from Muncie to New York City. And I love that he's got the Muncie College suitcase with him, and it's even got the eagle symbol on it, the two hands flapping. And I've always talked about how the Coen Brothers, once they write something, that's it. David, you're talking about, like, I hope that they got final cut. I don't think that there's a way to get another cut of a Coen Brothers movie unless you completely fuck it up. But they don't rewrite once they have something that's ready for the screen. But it was interesting reading one of their earlier drafts of the Hudsucker Proxy to read some of these things. There isn't the job board in the earlier draft of this, which I think is from May of 92, maybe. And then it's Norville comes into town and he tries to do some of these jobs. So he's trying to put a fat guy into a suit and it's way too small for him. He's washing dishes and he keeps breaking the dishes. Like, he's only handed 2 dishes and he manages to break those. So it was interesting to see the evolution of the script. I think the job board is much more efficient. You get the whole thing with the words coming up on screen, experience a must, experience necessary, 7 years experience, all of these things. I thought those were very nice in the way that we dissolve from him getting that newspaper, seeing the future is now ad that's circled by the coffee ring, again with the circle, and again, the wind taking over and bringing that newspaper back to Norville, because the wind is a player in this movie, believe it or not. The wind from wearing Hudsucker when he jumps out the window and it's blowing all these papers around, which could be the Bumstead contract. I'm not sure if it is or not, but then the Bumstead contract itself gets blown all the way around before we have Sidney Musburger out on the ledge and almost falling. And I'll talk about that in a little bit, but the introduction of Sidney Musburger, because we see the rest of the idiots around the board table, all of these great character actors, so many good faces. You've got Gary Allen, you've got Roy Brocksmith, just all of these guys. And
you have to mention the casting in this movie, because the casting across the board, you don't even need to hear these men speak. You just see it in their faces. They are cast for their faces. Mm-hmm. And you cut to them and it's almost like a punchline, just cutting to them. And you see this all throughout the movie. The two, mailmen in the bar asking for promo.
Yeah.
No, the taxi drivers, excuse me. That's right. The taxi drivers. And the waitress and the secretaries to Musburger and the fat lady who screams after Charles Durning throws off the... There's nothing they're doing. It's just literally what they look like and how they take up the screen. And even if they have a line, like the boardroom, everybody has a line in these kind of Greek chorus, all over the place. Everybody has one line and they're all bouncing off of each other. The casting throughout has to be perfect or else this doesn't work. The newspaper reporters, just look at the faces and the bodies of these newspaper reporters in the newspaper reporter scene with John Mahoney, telling them like,
I want to know what makes the idea man tick. Where's he from? Where's he going? I want to know everything about this guy. Has he got a girl? Has he got parents?
Everybody has parents.
All right. How many?
How does it feel to be a millionaire? Is he going to get married? What does he think of New York? Is he smart? Is he dumb? A million angles. He's been here 3 days, and one of you numbskulls brought in. Any half-wit novice could have done better.
Yeah, but we tried to find
Am I talking too loud or annoying anybody?
You know Corny Cobb. He's keeping them under lock and key.
Cobb. Never mind about Cobb. Use what little brains you've got. Find out something for yourselves.
I want the real story. I want the inside dope on this guy. Tony, who is... Mike, what's his name? What's he got hidden under that cape of his? Batteries? Why did he show up last night? Dick, where does he come from? Does he have a girlfriend? What's his favorite ball team, Kent? Now listen to me. I tell you, boys and girls, whichever one of you gets it out of it is going to wind up with the single most important interview since God talked to Moses.
And you just look around the room and that's the punchline. The casting is the punchline in this movie. And that is varsity level craft there. Varsity level craft in the casting, production design, cinematography, like all of it. Varsity level. Absolutely amazing.
Yeah, there's not a wasted moment. Everybody is interesting. They don't necessarily all have internality. They're all riveting. If they've got one line, they deliver it.
Mike Starr doesn't even have a line.
How about it, Parkinson? You've been awful quiet over there.
Still waters run deep, Chief.
The only thing that runs deep with Parkinson are the holes in his ears.
Richard Schiff of The West Wing is apparently a mail clerk, but he's in the mailroom and he throws some letters on Norville Barnes in that incredible tracking shot where he's going by and there's this cacophony and chaos going on, which if you've ever made a movie or if you've been on a set of a movie, a shot like that will take all day if you're lucky to get right. That is a very, very difficult thing. That many people, that much going on in the frame, that long a shot, that kind of choreography, that's like a dance. That's so hard to do. You need to rehearse that for hours to get that right. It's astonishing. It's an astonishing film.
Let's talk about the villain of the piece with Sidney Musburger. To call this movie the Hudsucker Proxy and to talk about the HUD throughout so much of this movie, and that Mr. Paul Newman was HUD in the movie, named HUD, obviously a reference. And then the whole thing of the guy who's giving Norville his orientation. What a wonderful orientation he's given him. That whole thing of like, you do this and they dock you, and they do this and they dock you. That's straight out of Cool Hand Luke with the whole like, you do this, you spend a night in the box. You do that, you spend a night in the box.
You punch it at 8:30 every morning, except you punch it at 7:30 following a business holiday. Unless it's a Monday, then you punch it at 8 o'clock. Punch in late, and they dock this goes to 7. That's the Matuzak. Incoming articles, get a voucher. Outgoing articles, provide a voucher. Move any article without a voucher, and they dock you.
Take this off the secretarial pool on 3. ASAP.
Letter size of green voucher, folder size of yellow voucher, parcel size of maroon voucher.
Hey, kid, this is for Morgatron. Chop, chop.
Wrong color voucher, and they dock you. 678-704-9 Alpha/6. That is your employee number. It will not be repeated. Without your employee number, you cannot get your paycheck.
All right, this goes up to 27. Return a waiver. Do not return without a signed waiver.
Inter-office mail is code 37. Intra-office mail is 37-3. Outside mail is 3-37. Code it wrong, and they dock you.
I was supposed to have this on 28 10 minutes ago. Cover for me.
This has been your orientation. Is there anything you do not understand? Is there anything you understand only partially? If you have not been fully oriented, you must file a complaint with personnel. File a faulty complaint, and they dock you.
Them clothes got laundry numbers on them. You remember your number and always wear the ones that has your number. Any man forgets his number, spends the night in the box. These here spoons you keep with you. Any man loses his spoon, spends the night in the box. There's no playing grab ass or fighting in the building. You got a grudge against another man, you fight him Saturday afternoon. Any man playing grab ass or fighting in the building spends the night in the box. First bell is at 5 minutes of 8. When you get in your bunk. Last bell is at 8. Any man not in his bunk at 8 spends the night in the box. There's no smoking in the prone position in bed. To smoke, you must have both legs over the side of your bunk. Any man caught smoking in the prone position in bed spends the night in the box. You get 2 sheets every Saturday. You put the clean sheet in the top sheet in the bottom sheet you turn in the laundry board. Any man turns in the wrong sheet spends the night in the box. Which no one will sit in the bunks with dirty pants on. Any man with dirty pants on sitting on the bunk spends the night in the box. Any man don't bring back his empty pop bottle spends the night in the box. Any man loud talking spends the night in the box. You got questions, you come to me.
Here we have the tables turned now with Musburger up on the top floor. When Musburger meets Norville, I just want to throw this out there. I think that Musburger, when he gets this idiot that comes into his office and he shows him the circle, for kids, shows him the circle, and Musburger's, oh, sit down here, take this cigar. I don't think that Musburger at that point even has Norville in mind for the proxy job. I think he's just there to humiliate him at that point.
You're from the basement, aren't you? And weren't blessed with much education.
Well, I'm a college graduate.
But you did not excel in your studies.
Well, I made Dean's List. At the Muncie College of Business Administration.
Oh, wow. And your friends, they called you jerk, didn't they? Dope. Dipstick. Lame brain. Schmo. Not even behind your back.
No, as a matter of fact, they voted me most likely to succeed.
You're fired. Get your feet off my desk. Get out of my office.
Had Waring Hudsucker not killed himself that morning, I think that he still would have done the exact same thing just to humiliate this dope from the mailroom. That's my feeling anyway.
I don't know if he would have felt that he had the time. I think that I think he was just been like, get out.
We don't crawl here at Hudsucker, which Norville ends up saying again later on, which is great.
Talk about casting against type. There's not enough time on this podcast, or really any podcast, to talk about the work of Paul Newman and the career he's had and the impact that he had on Hollywood and then cinema at large. This is a late career casting choice, late career role for him.
And he looks fantastic. I used to always think that he looked
so
like
on
an
top
old
of it.
man in this, but no, he looks great.
And he comes off as this growling, lethal antagonist who's very sadistic and creepy. And there's a lot to him that is genuinely unsettling. You know him, you see him, and you like immediately know he's not someone to be messed with. This is a scary villain, this guy.
I had to look up Aloysius' name because it's such an unusual name. And it led me to another fantastic comedy, which was It Happened on Fifth Avenue, where this tramp comes in. There's a very rich man who leaves his house every 6 months. He goes to, I think it's West Virginia. And so during the winter, it's completely open. So Aloysius and his dog will sneak in through the back and spend the entire winter inside of this guy's house. And then when the guy comes back from the winter, Aloysius goes down to West Virginia and spends 6 months in that house. But Aloysius, I had to look up that name, finding out that it has morphed into Lewis. And then I'm like, okay, Lewis as in Lewis Cipher. Is that what we're supposed to be getting out of this? Because I don't think he has a line. He just will growl or will glower at people and will use his thumb to indicate stuff. And otherwise, he doesn't talk. He just is an agent of evil.
Silent but deadly.
Oh, yeah.
I love how Sid Musburger is so evil and growling, but he's still hilarious. And that is such a trick, right? When he gets in the car and he says, at some point, I'd like to hear about this too, right? Like, how can you not just fall out of your chair laughing at that?
Sure. The dingus.
What am I, a head shrinker? And I have to tell you guys, like I talked about how once the hula hoop came up, I was just like elated, couldn't get any happier. I might be lying because the whole scene of Sidney when he falls out the window and we had the flashback to the tailor and then the flashback that we should not have any information about at all, where we go back to the tailor and we see him changing his mind about giving Mr. Musburger a double stitch for his pants.
Don't worry, Mr. Musburger. I got you. I got you by your pants.
Mr. Musburger, I'm going to give you pants a nice double stitch, eh? Here's make them real strong, and you're going to look real sharp.
No, single stitch is fine.
But the double stitch, she lasts forever.
Why on earth would I want a double stitch? To pad your account. Single stitch is fine.
What the heck? Mr. Mooseburger is such a nice man. I'm going to give him a double stitch anyway. That's some strong stitch, you bet.
Oh my God, that is fucking amazing. It's one of my highlights of all times.
That's the kind of thing that would get cut if they didn't have all the money in the world to make this movie. That would have been cut in 2 seconds. There's no reason for that little aside to be there, except that it's just really, it's part of the reason I think it's funny is that it has no reason being there at all. It has nothing to do with anything. It doesn't even really make sense because Sidney Musburger is not a nice guy. And he's not even a nice guy to the tailor. If they didn't have all the money in the world to make this, like that would have been like, yeah, cut that day where we're shooting the tailor or whatever it is, that 6-hour period or 8-hour period. We could do something else with that time or save some money. Nope, we're going to shoot this complete asterisk in the plot and stop everything for this, basically this weird non-joke, which is really funny.
What I love about that scene is that it takes this precipitous moment where he could actually get some humanity, right? He's on the verge of plunging to his own death. And let's presume that he understands that he now has the double stitch in his. And so he gets to come away from this moment learning absolutely nothing.
No,
right? He gets to just
all.
completely continue on his path into evil, right? Which becomes even funnier later when he decides he's going to try to jump out the window himself. And Phil just can't quite manage to do that of his own volition.
Which that whole thing leads to the laughing montage. And this movie is just rife with just amazing montages. To see the transition of Norville Barnes from the mail clerk into the president of Hudsucker Industries, just through laughing, everyone laughing, the board laughing at him, but him not realizing that they're laughing at him, and he thinks that he knows what the joke is. And we just go through that whole thing. We go back to the freaking tailor, see him getting his suit being made. I just love it. Just that whole thing. That montage is fantastic, but the montage of the hula hoop creation, that is just brilliant. And especially to see the way the whole thing is put together, that we have movements within that montage, that we go from the creation of the hula hoop, that we go through all of those pneumatic tubes, that we have all the rubber stamps that are being put, that we've got the 3 guys behind the window that are trying to come up with the names for it. And then we move from that to the actual creation of the hula hoop. And then we move from that to then the stock ticker and waiting to see if the idea of the hula hoop is going to catch on. And that being intercut then with that little kid, that freaky little kid who finds that hula hoop. Again, the circle finding this kid the way that the Hudsucker ad found Norville, and the way that kid just picks up on that hula hoop. And when those other kids see him and they're just enthralled with him, when they moved to him doing it around the foot, I laughed harder. When they moved to him doing it around the neck, I was in stitches. And all that whole montage, from what I understand, was all done by Sam Raimi. That's all second unit stuff that he shot. At least that, all the stuff with the hula hoop. And that's fucking brilliant. And then again, going back to the soundtrack and putting the saber dance on there, amazing.
If you're going to have a second unit director, you might as well have someone like Sam Raimi who could do it basically better than anyone in the world.
Exactly.
You're going to amazing second unit stuff. Yeah. Not enough people understand in a movie like this, and whenever you're not seeing basically the A stars or a major dialogue scene, that's what's called second unit. So all those inserts, all those shots of signs and people doing stuff, and there's tons of stuff like that in this movie. Pneumatic tubes, tracking shots through pneumatic tubes. That's all done by and managed by second unit. And Sam Raimi is no slouch in that department.
And Sam Raimi was one of the 3 guys who are behind that window coming up with the different things. You can hear his voice while he's doing that. And I love that they've got the secretary reading War and Peace and Anna Karenina out front. It's just like to show that time is passing while these guys are trying to brainstorm this idea. And then when the guy finally gets it, fellas, and it's, what is it? What could this be? And then we get the revelation of hula hoop.
Something that occurred to me watching it during this bout of rewatching for the podcast, it made me think about, we do have Sam Raimi actually behind the screen, but I was also thinking this in terms of the cab drivers, Benny and Lou. Is Benny and Lou enacting Joel and Ethan's process here? Is this their way of their Alfred Hitchcock appearance on film, but still through other character actors? And it never really quite occurred to me that, oh yeah, this is a movie about storytelling. And so it is actually revealing a little bit of what seems to be their process. They're narrating what they're seeing. We don't hear any of the dialogue, but I'm speaking about the cab drivers. We don't hear any of the dialogue, Amy or Norville at all. All we hear are Benny and Lou going through the whole, her mother needs an operation. Adenoids, no, lumbago. That guy's got whiskers.
Enter the dame.
There's one in every story.
$10 says she's looking for a handout.
$20 says not here, she don't find one.
She's looking for a mark.
She finds him.
She sits down.
And orders a light lunch. How will she pay for this lunch?
She looks through her purse.
No money.
The mark notices. He's not noticing, Benny.
Maybe he's wise.
Oh, he don't look wise.
Plan 2. Here come the waterworks.
Yellowstone.
Old Faithful.
Hello, Niagara.
He notices.
She's distressed.
He's concerned.
She explains her predicament and...
Enter the light lunch. She's got other problems, of course.
There's illness in the family.
Her mother needs an operation.
Urgently.
Adenoids.
No, Benny. Lumbago.
Oh, that gag's got whiskers on it.
Uh-oh. He ain't biting, Benny.
She's losing him, Lou.
Maybe he's wise.
He don't look wise.
How does she pull this out?
He's getting away.
She better think fast.
She isn't. She is.
She's good, Benny.
She's damn good, Lou.
Can I get you boys anything else?
Bromo.
Every movie has exposition, and Lord knows this movie has a ton of plot, and you need to communicate that. And they could have just shot a scene that would have been completely standard and understandable with Norville and Amy, and she's doing all the things, and he ends up taking her back to his office, because he thought she fainted. But the creativity to bring up these two characters who we've never met and never see again, narrating what they're doing, it's a brilliant way to cover what would basically be a kind of standard, very basic, bland, boring exposition scene. It takes this exposition scene and you flip it on its head, and you're like, no, we're not even going to tell you what they say. We're just going to these people are just going to watch and describe, because that's this movie. This movie is never going to come at you exactly from the straight line. It's going to come at you from the side. And when you think it's going to come at you from the left, it's going to come at you from the right. And that's one of the reasons I think that people were turned off by this movie, because they couldn't get a grip on it, because the movie was always subverting expectations, subverting where you thought it was going to go, subverting even these basic scenes that every movie needs to have, where the meet cute, really, these two main characters are going to fall in love, have to meet and have the meet cute. Totally just ditches it. We're not even going to talk about that. They're not even going to be talking. You don't even know what they say. We don't care. We're just going to be on these two people that you've never met, have nothing to do with this movie. And they're just going to be like, yeah, she's doing this thing. Yeah, he's falling for it. He's a sucker. Whatever, that whole thing. It's amazing.
And you get the echo of, that gag's got whiskers on it, from Bruce Campbell later on as Smitty.
But I think this also touches on something else that I really like about this movie, which is that it is this romance, but nobody's getting married at the end of this, right? So you've got all feeling of it, but we don't have to get into all the aftermath of, marriage and kids and all the other stuff that isn't that terribly interesting. Wait, this is like in the same way that like this is a New Year's movie with barely any Christmas in it,
Oh, yeah.
which is another thing that I just love. 'Cause, well, the less Christmas, the better for me. We get a little hint of it, but it's not the way that it would just dominate any other film set in this time frame.
When you get the little milestones as far as where we are in relation to Christmas, where we are in relation to New Year, in that another montage, for God's sakes, the news on the march, for lack of a better term, I'm trying to remember the name. It does say Tempest Fugit, so again, time flies. So again, we've got the time aspect of that, but the news reel that John Goodman is not narrating this, folks. It's Carl Mundt is narrating this. He took his name from his character in Barton Fink to do that, which made me then think, is Carl Mundt, is he related to Ole Munch? I don't know if you watched the latest season of Fargo, but there's a character on there named Ole Munch who just is another force of nature. I think he and Carl Mundt could basically be brothers if they wanted to. But yeah, I love when he is narrating this whole thing and talking about the hula hoop craze, and that we actually get to see real stock footage of the hula hoop craze and then intercut with all this new footage.
Mom's taking a break from her chores and she's vacuuming with
This whole thing of how Norville Barnes was bringing everyone together, but actually they're still apart spatially. So good. But yeah, they mentioned in that newsreel that New Year's is coming up. So you don't get, yeah, I like that we get a little bit of Christmas time, but that this is a New Year's movie that is playing into time so much, I think is very smart.
Didn't Joe McBride write about this? There's an element of chance that runs through all of the Coen Brothers work. Was it Joe McBride or somebody else? I know that I read something about how elements of, and you see this in other filmmakers, Woody Allen is actually one of them as well. Like he talks about luck all the time. And in fact, his last movie, his 50th movie, Coup de Chance, is all about luck having a huge factor in one's life. There are elements of luck and the universe affecting things throughout all of the Coen Brothers movies. Their underlying theme a lot of the time is that we're all just these pawns in this giant space where anything can happen. It's how we roll with it is what interests them. It's not the fact that it happens, because you can't possibly control the crazy shit that happens to people. Crazy shit happens to everybody. And more than I think any of us would care to admit a lot of the time. It's how we deal with it. It's how we roll with it. And if nothing else, Hudsucker Proxy is all about luck being a factor that profoundly changes the lives of everyone in this film.
Even going back to that Bumstead contract and the whole thing inside of Sidney's office, that's one thing that leads to another, that leads to another, that leads to another. Pretty soon we've got Norville with his foot in the trash bag and his leg is on fire, or when he's carrying the water jug all the way from one end of the room to the other, and there's just a couple drops left at the very end. Again, that's another interesting one. I was talking about how Jennifer Jason Leigh is having those multiple conversations. Sidney's also having multiple conversations in that scene. He literally has two phones. He's talking to both people on both phones. He's got his intercom going off with his secretary, the amazing secretary, talking about the Bumstead contract. And then you've got Norville, and he's also talking to Norville. And it's like, Norville doesn't know if he's being talked to or not. And we, the audience, I don't think really know if Musburger is talking to him or somebody else. Just the way that all of the ins and outs and whatnots are interacting with each other is fantastic. And that Sidney has the power to, again, stop time when he says, wait a minute. And the Newton's cradle just stops right then. It's amazing. And real quick, I wanted to talk about Bruce Campbell and his role in here. And I know it's a very small role, but it's a great role. And apparently he was more involved in the preparation for this movie than he actually was in front of the camera time. He was running lines with Paul Newman beforehand. So he was like Newman's partner for this and was basically being Norville Barnes throughout so much of this. And then I interviewed him. Bruce Campbell was my very first interview that I ever did. And when I interviewed him, I was just like, hey, tell me about Jennifer Jason Leigh and what it was like. And he was just like, she was the most professional person I've ever worked with. And she knew every single line before she came on set. And when you hear her deliver that machine gun pattern that she's doing, I mean, especially when she gets upset at Norville after Norville is sending her a letter, but doesn't know he's sending her a letter. And he's just like, oh, don't worry about it, Amy. She's probably just some washed up career gal. And just, I love that whole thing. And when she yells at him about
Norville Barnes, you don't know a thing about that woman. You don't know who she really is. And only a numbskull thinks he knows things about things he knows nothing about.
Say, what gives?
Just that, and that is such an overly written line, but she delivers with just perfect panache.
Moses then throws back at her face. That scene between Moses and Amy that still hits me so hard. The way that he laughs at her, says that I'm happy enough, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like that just being called on her bullshit in that moment is just a breathtaking moment. I don't think I've ever seen anything like that in any other movie ever. Yeah.
I love that Norville is right next to the clockworks, but he doesn't ever open up the door. She's the one that opens up that door. And I think he doesn't open it because it says do not enter on it. And she has no problems with that, whereas Norville will follow the rules.
Right. Can we talk a little bit about Tim Robbins?
Yeah, we've talked about everybody but Tim Robbins so far.
Because I came into this when I first saw it, just like thrilled with the cast, right? Because I had already been a huge fan of Jennifer Ethan Lee, obviously a huge fan of Paul Newman, Bruce Campbell. But Tim Robbins had been just a recent discovery for me at the time. I had really just started going to movies obsessively at this point. And so leading up to this, there was Shortcuts, where he's an insidious police officer. And before that, The Player, and just these evil, awful, and chilling characters, right? And to turn around, and now we have him just being this innocent rube.
His breakout role was in Bull Durham, who was about as ruby as possible. Like, he played basically second banana to Kevin Costner, this dumb baseball player named Nuke, who and basically Kevin Costner and Tim Robbins out for the affections of Susan Sarandon. It's a great movie. But that kind of put him on the map. He had these little roles in Top Gun and Howard the Duck, if you even want to talk about that, which I really don't, because, oh my God, it's terrible. But he was also, the first leading role I remember seeing him in was Jacob's Ladder. I was just like, oh, wow, and Jacob's Ladder is a very odd film. You can tell if you look at the films that he's chosen since he became a bigger star, even like Cadillac Man, these are all really offbeat, non-standard, interesting choices. Even when they don't work, they're like, okay, that's very interesting. And he directed Bob Roberts, it made early 90s, made a sensation when it came out. I remember seeing it and being like, I don't know how it holds up now. I thought it was very deep in the early 90s because we had 12 years of a Republican administration at that point. And I think everybody was just a little bit exhausted by the corporate rule. And Bob Roberts was about this right-wing political candidate, a fictional one, who he played. And it's very funny. And then it gets very not funny. And it's a great little independent film. But yeah, he'd never had, I think, a lead role in a big movie like this before Hudsucker Proxy. Jacob's Ladder was a mid-budget kind of genre horror-y kind of thing. But everything else was just like Second Banana or these little smaller roles. Like you said, Shortcuts, which is a great movie, but he's a standout in that. There are it's a typical Altman, 24 characters or whatever, but you remember him and maybe a couple others, but you really remember his performance in that. And it's interesting that in the same year he did Hudsucker Proxy, Shawshank Redemption released, which is a movie. It's very funny because you have these movies that I think that we can call Shawshank Redemption right now the ultimate dad classic movie, the movie that like all the dads like. But when it came out, it was a bomb. They were both bombs, Hudsucker and Shawshank. Shawshank then came up and it was nominated for Best Picture, and that was a shock that year because no one expected it to be. But when they sent out the tapes and the Academy actually saw it, suddenly it got a bunch of nominations. And I think everybody understood that, wow, the marketing team failed on that. Again, bad or tough title. I won't say bad title. Both Hudsucker Proxy and Shawshank Redemption, there was a lot of talk about how the titles of both of these movies hurt the box office in a very tangible way. Very tangible. Would you see, if you're in Dubuque, would you see a movie called Hudsucker Proxy if it's playing at the multiplex? Maybe you wouldn't, because maybe you don't know what proxy means. Maybe you don't. Hudsucker Proxy, what does that mean? What is even that? It sounds like work. Maybe you don't want to go see that. Shawshank Redemption, what the hell does that mean? That sounds artsy, that sounds arch, that sounds whatever. Maybe you don't want to go see that. But the fact that both these movies, especially Shawshank, found a love on home video and afterwards, I think indicates what's in the film, like after the marketing, after the title, after the initial perception. And you got to give him credit for just pushing it. And you were talking about villains. I don't think there's a scarier villain in any movie than the one he played in Arlington Road, which is a really cool movie made by Mark Pellington. What year was that? I don't even know. I can look it up. Wait, it was 99. Oh my God. I dare anyone, if you have not seen Arlington Road, I dare you to sit down. It's Jeff Bridges and Tim Robbins. I guarantee you will not be able to know where this goes. And you will be on the edge of your seat in the last 5 minutes in a way that you are rarely on the edge of your seat. He is so good in this film.
And Joan Cusack is also terrifying.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yes. Joan Cusack, I forgot. Yes. Her performance is chilling. And she's known for comedy. Like, you think of her, you think of Broadcast News, you think of In and Out, you think of all these movies where she's just like Joan Cusack and amazing. But it's, oh my God, in this film, it's a scary film.
He was also, that same year, he was in Ready to Wear, another Altman film, and IQ, where he was playing the love interest to Meg Ryan. Yet another, actually, I don't think he gets his heart broken. She loves to break hearts in movies. I'm thinking of you, Bill Pullman. First off, I can't let a discussion of Tim Robbins go by without talking about Tapeheads, one of my most favorite films. He is so good in that. I love him in that. I tried to make my way through Eric the Viking. I still haven't been able to do it, but yeah, he's fantastic. And yeah, this 1-2 punch of Hudsucker and Shawshank was just an incredible year for him. And it is amazing that, yeah, Shawshank became that TNT staple for so many years. I kind of wish Hudsucker had gotten the same fate and we wouldn't be here defending it as much, but I don't think this movie needs defending. It stands on its own. It's so good, and just it continues to delight. Watching this again last night, I had forgotten some of the jokes that are here and just still continue to notice things. And especially now watching it after so many years of Coen Brothers movies, I'm just like, oh yeah, they like to have voiceovers. They like to have dream sequences. They like to play with high and low culture. All of the use of the classical music that Carter Burwell plays with. We've got the whole song during the dance/dream sequence. You've got the chamber orchestra in there playing music for him, along with his bodyguard who's reading the comics and everything. And I just love how he's becomes like king shit after he comes up with this one idea and everybody's just like, where's the next one? Where's the next big idea? And
how do you respond to the charges that you're out of ideas? Has Norville Barnes run dry?
Oh, not at all. Why, just this week I came up with several new sweet ideas. A larger model hula hoop for the portly, a battery option for the lazy or the spastic, a model with extra sand for the hard of hearing. Oh yes, I'm earning my keep.
I'm thinking about the episode that we just did with Tank Girl. So we're talking about a very similar time frame, and that was another film where we've got a very fast talking, well, let's call her a career gal. I hate to just fall back on what seems like a maybe tired thing to say, but I feel like misogyny plays into the failure of this movie at the box office. And I think it's because I think Hollywood still has a hard time knowing how to market a film with a fast talking career gal in it, right? Like, they don't have what it takes to put forward. And part of what makes me think about this is that I feel like a lot of the things that I feel like they recycled some of the things from this film for The Big Lebowski, right? We've got the mystical narrator, right? In The Big Lebowski, we've got the big dream fever dance sequence, right? Like, all these things are repurposed, but in The Big Lebowski, we don't really have the Archer like talking in your face at a million miles a minute. Instead, we have Julianne Moore, who's being a little coy, a little svelte, right? And it makes And I remember seeing The Big Lebowski for the first time and feeling let down. That was my very first moment of a Coen Brothers movie where I was like, I don't know. I don't know if this is the movie for me. And it's so interesting to me that, like we're talking with the Shawshank Redemption, The Big Lebowski is the one that kind of really took off and became the cult favorite. And I find, even when I was working in the video store for all those years, I was like, if you like The Big Lebowski, I really think you should give Hudsucker a chance. And sometimes that recommendation worked and sometimes it just did not.
It's funny. I also did not enjoy Lebowski the first time I saw it. I don't know if it's because I was going through a divorce at the time and having a rough life, but it didn't click with me. But the thing that a friend of mine said to me years ago about Lebowski is also very true about this, is that the Coen Brothers love to make movies at very specific moments in time. And I think that's also why the Fargo TV show works. I know that they're not necessarily involved, but I think Noah Hawley has definitely picked up on that. This whole idea of Lebowski is set in 1989. And 1 year earlier, 1 year later, there wouldn't be so much of what's going on. The whole thing with George Bush, this aggression will not stand, all of that kind of stuff. You just get that very solid moment of this is 1989. And then you come to this movie and it's just, okay, here we are, 1958. All of this stuff has to do with 1958. And I just love that. We even have fucking Dwight David Eisenhower makes a cameo in this movie. It is so good. Actually, two cameos, but one is as an American flag. I just love that it is so specific to 1958. And each one of their movies is very particular when it comes to Fargo is set in this very particular time and place. And this one, the place is as important as the time with this fake New York, which is just the New York of the movies. It is not a New York of a real place. Like you said, Musburger getting into a car, I think he's the only person that is seen in a car this whole time.
I'd done a little reading that talked about how this had been developed a little bit in response to Reagan politics, right? And it was funny because I do watch this movie frequently in a way that I don't tend to watch other movies. I tend to watch this at least once a year. And I found it really hard to rewatch it during the George W. Bush reign because it felt very close at that point. I'm like, okay, so the president is clearly an idiot, an imbecile, a rube.
And your friends, they called you jerk, didn't they?
Wow, it really, just in that political moment, it made it really difficult for me to enjoy my favorite film. Fortunately, everything's better now. Get Moses out here to laugh at me. I mentioned the video store. I want to say that one of my favorite moments, I used to manage a Video Americon, this art house video store here in Baltimore for many years. And there was a day where somebody came in and just had this long list of movies that they wanted to check out. And it was more than our limit. So I was trying to kindly suggest this. And on the list was Hudsucker Proxy. And he said, I'm trying to collect these because somebody in my family, I don't remember whether it was the father or grandfather, John Seitz, who was playing Benny, I believe, in the film, had just passed. And I'm trying to pull together all of these clips. And so this is an actor that had been based in Baltimore, that had been born in Baltimore, lived in Baltimore. And there's a little bit of Baltimore pride in there because Bromo Seltzer came from Baltimore. And
Nice.
So at the end of that scene where they go back and they need a Bromo, it gives me this little twinge of Baltimore pride every time I watch that film.
I love that Joe Grafassi is the other guy. We talk about him so much because we do that podcast on Barney Miller. And he's one of those character actors that just fell in with that group. And he showed up a lot on there. And that's one of those things. Also, I want to say, one of the guys, the guy who keeps saying 45 with the mezzanine, he's another character actor that I've seen in Barney Miller as well. The guy who I love the most is the one with the eyebrows that sticks.
Oh, the one who tries to jump? Yeah.
Yes.
He's amazing.
So good. And just that he is crying and carrying on, and the way that Musburger just poo-poos him about things, just get a grip.
Well, and the guy who was doing the initial speech where he was at the
Broxman.
very top of the film. Yeah. The psychiatrist in Total Recall. The one who comes in the middle, my favorite scene in Total Recall, the one who comes in the middle is, you're not really standing here right now, Arnold Schwarzenegger. Except maybe you are.
This is twice this month that he's getting a mention because he was also a police expert witness in Tango and Cash.
Oh, that movie.
From high comedy to low comedy, we cover it all here. There's not a lot of dick jokes in this movie.
Not enough. We should have more. Never enough.
Talking again about Jennifer Jason Leigh, her whole thing that she keeps saying and has to repeat and then has to bring it back again when Norville picks her up, like literally picks her up and carries her into his office. The way that he is exhausted is fantastic, but just her whole, I myself.
At any rate, I arrived in town not 10 days ago, full of dreams and aspirations, anxious to make my way in the world. A little naive, perhaps, but thank you. Armed with determination, a solid work ethic, and an indomitable belief in the future.
I myself.
Only to have that belief, that unsullied optimism dashed against the marble and mortar of the modern workplace. But after all, such is life. Seek and ye shall find, work and ye shall prosper.
Cigarette?
No, thank you. Seek and ye shall find, work and ye shall prosper. These were the watchwords of my education, the ethos of my tender years. These were the values that were instilled in me while I was growing up in a little town you've probably never heard of.
Do you mind if I join you?
Be my guest. A little town you've probably never heard of. A dusty crossroads of which you've probably never heard.
She will not stop. She's just amazing. Oh, real quick, Peter Gallagher's cameo in this.
Oh, hilarious.
Peter Gallagher, who was like at the top of his game back here. It was like a few years after Sex, Lies, and Videotape. He's still making stuff. What was that one? He did the remake of Crisscross. But it was like, what happened to Peter Gallagher? He was everywhere for a while.
He was on the OC for a while.
Wow.
I had a good job there. But even that's been a little while. I'm not sure what he's up to these days. I gotta say, I copped his drink holding in my performances. Because I perform a lot. And I think about, I know he's not the first one to do that, pretend to take a drink, but have to go into the lyric, right? And it's a stage device that I am brought into my own act. And I think about Vic Tonetta all the time when I'm on stage. Just that little brief moment that he's on camera. This is the power of the Hudsucker Proxy. Little tiny moments are forever in this film.
Yeah, I love the women swooning. I love when Norville is between the two women, and then you find out later on that one of those women is the one that broke Waring's heart, which makes it even funnier when you realize that. The way that he is squeezed between these two large women on that little divan is fantastic. And I love when Sidney comes over, he's just like, oh yeah, we're going to talk to some of the investors. Be careful what you say. Scratch that. He's doing everyone. Oh, and the other thing about Tim Robbins' performance that I love that I can't believe I didn't bring up is the way that he thinks about things and that ideas move around his head above his head, where he looks up and starts looking for the idea and then it will finally come to him. He does that 3 times in this movie and I love it every single time.
I think it speaks to the fact that he's not an idiot.
No.
He's naive, for sure.
Oh, yeah.
I think that is what makes him a little more endearing than many of the other characters here. But I also think, for me, in the moment when I saw it, I was really recently out of college and trying to find my way in the world. And one of the reasons that I love this movie so much, that it did hit that note of me recognizing the ways that I was a corn-fed rube, like make my way into the world as a fast-talking career gal. It was like, I felt like there was maybe some instructions in there somehow for me personally, right?
Real quick, I want to talk about Tim Robbins' speech, too, that he gives to Jennifer Jason Leigh at that party when he starts.
Karma.
Oh, karma. But when he is just spinning this beautiful tale about how they might have been reincarnated again, that whole cyclical thing again of death, rebirth, life, death, rebirth, life. And here he's talking about perhaps in another life we had met each other. And he just spins this beautiful yarn and it takes forever for him to get through there. Or perhaps we just touched antlers and never met again. And then he turns around and says, but is it okay if I still call you dear? It is just, oh my God, what did you just do?
Such a good line.
So great. It is so great. Oh, man.
Isn't that right, Zaza?
Wow.
And a moment for Anna Nicole Smith.
Probably her finest role. And that she doesn't have to say any lines probably makes a lot of fun.
Yeah, she's spectacular. Just love this movie. It's so quotable. It's so perfect.
Amazing.
Everybody
It's an amazing
should watch
film.
it.
Yeah, and going back to what you said before, David, this movie was pilloried. There were so many people that just hated this. First off, with the box office, which doesn't translate to reviews, but the box office budget of 25 million, box office of 11 million. So huge disaster, like you were saying. And then so many people just didn't like this. So many of the critics. It ended up on a lot of top 10 year-end lists. I know it ended up on mine back when I used to do that. But just people didn't get it. Like John Simon of the National Review described it as asinine and insufferable.
John Simon was a curmudgeon, though. He said a lot of things about a lot of movies that are somewhat problematic, but yeah.
Ebert saying it's all surface and no substance. And I'm like, no, there is totally substance with this. This is not just this mindless pastiche of old films. They take old films and they make them into something brand new. And it's not like they're just aping the older movies. I know that it was basically like a Doris Day Rock Hudson type musical that was redone with Ewan McGregor and I can't remember who else. It wasn't Alicia Silverstein, but it was like one of these old school musicals, and that got lambasted when it came out. It's just like, no, that's old. We can't do that. Like, you have to come up with new stuff. So Hudsucker, old stuff, we don't want that.
That's a stylistic bias, really. What we're talking about here is, and this is the thing with critics, it's like they see so many movies, and you have to look at the time when they review the film and how it hits, which is basically one of my theories about why genre movies like horror movies, sci-fi movies are routinely underrated, because there are so many bad ones that come out that these critics have to sit through, that there's a general bias against that. So when you have a movie that looks like a standard genre movie, but is actually much better, a lot of critics sometimes just don't see it, which is why you look back and it's like Halloween got bad reviews when it came out. Up until Ebert, I think Ebert was the one who like brought Halloween into, no, this is a great film. Sometimes one or two critics break out and be like, everyone missed the boat. You should check this out. The Matrix didn't get great reviews. It got very mixed reviews. There were a lot of people who was like, oh, it's another sci-fi movie, blah, 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 blah. Because they saw all of these sci-fi movies that and they were just, they weren't thinking. They weren't actually putting it together. I think Hudsucker Proxy was just basically, the Coen Brothers, they just won with Barton Fink, which was this kind of like impenetrable movie. And now they're doing this big budget movie and it's so arch, and who's going to like this? And, I'm just John Q. Public. I'm going to, no, blah, 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 blah. And I think that it doesn't really reflect well on the critics that pan this film, because I think clearly the pans of this film come from a more anti-art, anti-intellectual, anti-cinema vibe. Like, no, just give me meat and potatoes. It's just, not everything needs to be meat and potatoes. This movie was not meat and potatoes. This movie was a filet. And if you want to have a Big Mac, you can go have a Big Mac. I have nothing against Big Macs, but if you can't appreciate a filet when it's put in front of you, maybe you need to take like a vacation. Get back to it in a month where you're a little more refreshed.
Mm-hmm. Is it Downward Love?
Yes, that's it.
There we go. Shoo.
Is that Renee Zellweger?
This is Renee Zellweger, Ewan McGregor, Sarah Paulson, David Hyde Pierce. Yeah. All right. I got to it through David Hyde Pierce. I couldn't find it on McGregor's filmography. The other thing that drives me crazy about this movie is that it has been treated with such disrespect after it was released. I talked about the poster. I think the poster could have been better. And this movie only released on Warner Archives on DVD in the United States. At least it was released with a few extras, very paltry extras, in Germany. And this is the cover of the German version. And I'm showing this to my co-host. It is,
oh my God,
wearing Hudsucker taking a dive off the building. You get to see him as he's going down to the street. This is the only version that has extras that I could find. It's got the teaser, the trailer. What's it say? Oh, I can't read German, but luckily the interviews are all in English. So it's got interviews with the cast. But it's like,
show that again.
This should have a Criterion release, not just a shitty German Blu-ray.
Hudsucker, Der große Sprung, The Big Leap.
There you go.
Oh, there you go.
So no mentions, no shots of hula hoops at all. This is the way this movie should have been marketed, in my opinion.
okay, I know that you think that the poster is a spoiler, but he's just holding a red hoop. It's like I did not get hula hoop off of that myself. He's holding this red oval thing, and it's just, okay, what is that? I don't know what that is. When the hula hoop is brought out in the film and it's a surprise, yeah, I don't know. I was delighted. I don't think it's as much of a spoiler as you think it is, but it's got a lovely little knot at the end as well. The ending of this film is really nice.
It's just one of many circles that's here. The halo that Charles Durning has.
Yes.
The wearing Hudsucker is wearing. Or he's
so good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Check this out. Everybody's wearing them up there, he says.
Did you guys read about the wings that he's wearing? That those wings were mechanical and actually worked, and that it was some crazy amount of turkey feathers that they hand stitched onto those. It was
crazy.
Either 40,000 or 140,000, and I don't remember which. Either one, it's crazy.
The detail in all the production is so phenomenal. When I read the story of the creation of the city, they're making all these buildings in 1/24th scale. In reading the article, I was like, okay, let me go do some math. And of course, this was answered in the article later, but the Hudsucker building that we see was, even in real life, was 20 feet tall, right? And they filmed these falling sequences with such meticulousness. The Tim Robbins falling scene was filmed in reverse. So he had to act in reverse.
Yeah, especially when it comes to a halt. That had to be reversed, which was fucking crazy.
Yeah, that level of workmanship. There was something like 15,000 windows that were created for the various buildings. All of the buildings were based on real buildings, but then moved around in a way that was more aesthetically pleasing, which most among us wouldn't rearrange Manhattan in a more aesthetically pleasing way if we could.
This is all set in Manhattan. These buildings are New York buildings, but they got a lot of inspiration from Chicago, and the actual Hudsucker building that Tim Robbins goes in, that is in Chicago. So it was nice that they're able to use that Art Deco-ness of Chicago and move it into New York. New York's got plenty of Art Deco buildings, don't get me wrong, but that was nice that they're able to merge those two big cities.
And they shot a lot of it in North Carolina, I believe, on big sound stages in North Carolina, which is at the time, or maybe still is, a right to work state. So there was a lot of production, Hollywood production, before the tax incentives of the late 90s and all the Canadian shooting. But there was a lot of shooting in the early 90s in North Carolina.
Oh, yeah. That was like Dino De Laurentiis' Home Away from Home, and then Joel Silver's No Dummy. He knows where to go for some good bargains as well. Carol Coe had a lot of stuff that was shot there. So like you were saying, as far as him and his big budget action films, yeah, a bunch of stuff was shot down in North Carolina. But this one was odd to be a North Carolinian production just because it's not a big action film. But to have Joel Silver bankrolling it, that was a weird marriage, but I'm so glad that it happened. All right, we're going to take a break and play a preview for next week's show right after these brief messages.
It's time for a typical day at Weaver High. There's team sports, cutting class.
I wouldn't leave school without a good reason.
Fire drills, and library skills. But the biggest event of the day,
We're gonna have a fight.
happens after school.
There isn't going to be any fight today!
3 o'clock high, rated PG-13. Starts Friday at theaters everywhere.
That's right. We are wrapping up Comedy Month next week with a look at 3 o'clock high. Until then, I want to thank my co-hosts, Rahne and David. So, David, what is the latest with you, sir?
I am making a documentary, as I said this on a number of podcasts, and still happening, about Exorcist II, The Heretic, and it's called Heretics, and it's about John Borman, the director, and how he was an A-list director, and he was given the biggest budget in Warner Brothers history to make this crazy movie, which was a huge catastrophe. Although an extraordinarily interesting film, and I have filmmakers talking about it. I have a lot of the crew, much of the cast that were still with us talking about it. And I'm really excited about it. I really want to get it out later this year in 2024, if not in 2025, and we'll see.
Can't wait to see it. Looking forward to it. Still keep hoping I'll get a screener link one of these days.
We have a rough cut of version 8, but we just shot another interview just yesterday. The first interview we shot in 10 months because we thought we were done production, but we got a major filmmaker who is a fan of Exorcist II: The Heretic, who finally said yes. And so we shot him yesterday. So basically in the next 2 weeks, I'm going to be going through the cut and putting him in. And yeah, we'll see where we are. But things are coming along abreast. And if you want to support this, I would love the support, because basically this is a documentary and it's, mostly self-funded, and we need all the help we can get. Go to hereticsmovie.com. If you click on the link, you can give a tax-deductible donation, because we're going through a nonprofit called the Film Collaborative. They have sponsored us. They have deemed us worthy of sponsorship. They don't do that for every movie, but it falls within their mission of cinema. So if you give money to Heretics at hereticsmovie.com, you can get a tax deduction because you're giving to a nonprofit. And it would help us out immensely, because we still have animation to make and music to do and some legal clearance. And there's a whole long way to go, but it's getting done.
And Rahne, how about yourself? What's new with you?
I've got a few things cooking in my art and music life that are not quite ready for public review, but who knows, when this podcast comes out, maybe I'll be able to announce some of them. You'll be able to find more of that at my website, rahne.com, RAHNE.com. But I've also, in my work life, just launched a podcast. Well, I should say relaunched a podcast. I work for the Hopkins Press, Johns Hopkins University Press. I publicize journal articles. And so I'm interviewing authors of amazing research in the various journals we published. Just finally relaunched what I'm calling season 3 of the Hopkins Press podcast. And I'm excited to host this and produce it. And so if you're out there and you're writing interesting journal articles and that Hopkins Press is publishing, hit me up.
Thank you so much, folks, for being on the show. Thanks to everybody for listening. If you want to hear more of me shooting off my mouth, check out some of the other shows that I work on. They're all available at weirdingwaymedia.com. Thanks especially to our Patreon community. If you want to join the community, visit patreon.com/projection booth. Every donation we get helps the projection booth take over the world.